In this first video, we're going to talk about graphical distortion. What that means is we are looking at a display of data in some sort of graph, like this bar chart that we have here, and yet there's some sort of distortion that's impacting our ability to understand the data that's being presented. In this particular bar chart, we see that we have interviews were conducted in 2005, and it's reported by Gallup. It's very important that graphical displays provide this type of information. And the question was, do you agree with the court's decision to remove the feeding tube from a patient whose name is Terry Schiavo? She was in a vegetative state for a number of years, and there was conflict between her husband, who wanted to remove the feeding tube, and her parents, who did not want to remove the feeding tube. So they asked, do you agree with the court's decision? And then they categorized based on political party. What this chart is displaying is it appears that Democrats had a much stronger level of agreement. It seems that there's a very low level of agreement between Republicans and independents, and that Democrats had a very there's a big disparity between the level of agreement between those who affiliate themselves as Democrats and the others. We saw in the previous graph that there was a huge disparity between the Democrats and the Republicans. But to look at this graph, while we still have the uniformity between the Republicans and the independents, we can see that it's much less of a split between. We have 62% versus 54%. Both of these are more than half, but to look at the previous data, it seemed that the Democrats were strongly in favor, while the Republicans and the independents were not at all in favor, when really in both cases we're looking at above 50%. So that's a distortion of data because of how they label the axis on the left, that they had. It started at 52 and went to like 65 or something like that. All right, so that's one way we can encounter graphical distortion. Another way we can encounter graphical distortion, this happens frequently when people are trying to make a more pretty graph. Here we have two pie charts. These are the exact same pie chart. If we look here, it looks like we have a much bigger portion over here in purple than we have here. Here it looks like it's less than a quarter. Here it maybe looks like it's about 25%. And they all just are a little off. And that's because perspective is used in this drawing to create this three-dimensional picture. What would be better is to just have a flat bar graph, no three-dimensional aspect, so you can appropriately determine the percentage of each shaded region. Here's another graphical distortion, and this one comes to how the question is reported. This is the same exact question. It's two views of a tax cut. The Republicans are saying we're going to evenly cut across the board, and how they're reporting it is how much taxes would fall for families in each of these following financial groups. All right, here the Democrats are reporting what's the share of the tax cuts. So in other words, we're seeing that 28% of the tax cuts are going to people who are making $200,000 or more. 23% of the tax cuts are being enjoyed by people who are making $100,000 to $200,000. Where here, it's still showing taxes are going to fall for each and every group, and that's the percent by which their taxes are going to fall. But here we can see that the people who are making under $10,000 are getting the least amount of tax cuts. Their taxes are only falling. They're only getting 0.2% of all the tax cuts. So of all the pool of money, they're only receiving 0.2% of the cuts, even though their paycheck, they'll see 2.33% roughly tax cut. So this is the same data represented in two different ways, and it's helping to paint a picture. The Republicans are trying to paint a picture of everybody's getting a tax cut. the middle of the pack, they're getting the biggest tax cuts. But when we talk dollar-wise, we're seeing that the amount of cuts that are going to the people who are making over $200,000, they're receiving the biggest majority of cuts overall from the pool of tax cuts. All right, so we need to make sure that we have pictures telling an accurate story, but reading the fine print, the idea there is that we need to know where the data is coming from. All right, and it's your job to be wary. Statistics in our popular media sometimes omit how that data is collected and how their conclusions are drawn. So we get misleading or shocking data, and it's really your responsibility to know what questions to ask and to know if you should believe the data or not.